a Water Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with two outstanding scientists, Georgia Kayser, assistant professor at UC San Diego, and Alhelí Calderón Villareal, assistant professor in California State University, San Marcos. We're going to be talking about access to drinking water, sanitation, hygiene for the unhoused population and women. We're going to have some challenging topics in our conversation for the unhoused, people using drugs, and migrants along the border. So just be aware of it. I am really excited to have this conversation because for many seasons, we've been thinking who to interview who can help us to navigate the water world with the unhoused population. I'm not well versed on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to learn from it. One other thing is that I always try to keep an eye for what I call the invisibles, people that they are around us, but we don't pay that much of attention. And one of those communities are the unhoused. I feel this episode really humbled to learn if Georgia and Alhelí we can borrow their glasses and see from what they have done, what they have experienced, and also all these issues that we have now along the border between San Diego and Tijuana. Faith, Malika, what are you interested about?
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to talk to some folks who are experts and working close to the issue of unhoused people and particularly waterways. I know, in California, that's been quite a big issue, particularly as the housing crisis has really grown, that, people for lots of reasons end up sheltering near waterways or actually in them, partly because of the ephemeral types of waterways that we have, and partly because you can be hidden along riverbanks and things like that. But then the challenge is always like what happens during the rainy season. And of course, there's always lots of community concerns about houseless populations. But I think the really interesting thing here is also focusing along the US-Mexico border as a very sort of specific subset of that larger issue that is definitely an issue in the state of California, is an issue that I see even here in rural Arizona, that lots of people live along the Verde River, which is my main waterway here in the middle of Arizona. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to just talking with folks about, what we can do to be supportive and all the different sort of angles that those of us who have water expertise really sort of need to be thinking about when we think about these issues, because it's, complex. And, I think having a non-reactionary sort of attitude about it and really kind of learning what we need to is really important. What about you, Malika?
Yeah, Faith, I like what you just said about the water community as a whole, considering these issues. It reminds me, I think it was maybe about a year ago, I had a conversation with some of the statewide extension specialists in California who are studying water in the Bay Area. And we were just, talking about what folks were working on and what they wanted to work on next. And somebody said, I am starting to get to a place where even though, their position was something related to forests or something, they wanted to focus on studying water and housing, just because the problem was starting to get to the point where, the water community has these skills and they should be used, in this way to support folks who don't have secure housing. So I like that kind of community aspect and way of trying to mobilize resources and expertise towards a critical problem. The other thing I was thinking about that I'm interested in learning more about is just the intersections of drinking water and sanitation and hygiene. Like when I have considered folks who, don't have housing security, I often, I think, and maybe many folks think about food. Like, where can I donate food? Where can and just this food aspect, but water is just as important, right, as food. And we use water for more than consumption. We use it for sanitation and hygiene. So I'm interested to know more about how all of those issues intersect with one another.
Yeah, and I agree that as we are thinking this in the broader perspective, access to drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene for the on-house community is not singular of California. It's everywhere in the United States, and I think this will be a great conversation for us to learn and for us to get roll up our sleeves and think how can we help on to this community. So without further ado, let's talk with Georgia and Alhelí. Bienvenidos a Water Talk. Today we're excited to have the opportunity to talk with two scientists that are doing outstanding research. Georgia Kayser, assistant professor at UC San Diego in the Herbert Wertheim School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science, and Alhelí Calderón Villareal, assistant professor in California State University San Marcos and the director of the collective Socio-Environmental Tijuana River Project. Georgia and Alhelí have extensive experience in the factors that limit access to drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. This is typically referred as WASH. We are really looking forward to talking with both of you today. We haven't talked about the on-house and access to drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. I made a really brief introduction of you. Can you share with us your path towards your field of expertise and how you got here, please?
Sure. So I guess what brought me to sort of studying water, sanitation, hygiene, and access and issues around quality, especially drinking water quality, really started when I was in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, sort of many years ago, about 20 some years ago. And while I was there, I lived in a rural village in the southernmost province of Ecuador. And I lived in a house that had piped drinking water, but it wasn't treated. And then I also didn't have any latrine or bathroom. I had to sort of build one. And then I also was regularly working in the health center in the village that I lived in and talking to people about different water-related diseases people were suffering from. So that really got me interested in this topic of WASH access, so water, sanitation, hygiene access. And I later was able to do some really interesting research during my graduate degree in Mexico and Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, where we were looking at some of the pollutants that were coming into the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef System, which is just off the coast of Mexico and Belize and Honduras and Guatemala, and provides a lot of tourism because a lot of people come to enjoy the beaches and that big reef and all the wildlife that's there. And one of the things that we realized in a lot of our interviews was that a big concern for people was water and health along the rivers that flowed into the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef System. So these sort of research experience and then sort of life in the Peace Corps in Ecuador really made me think a lot about WASH access, and sort of from there had different research experience. And then graduate school, after undergrad, I went to Tufts University and really focused on economics, and then really in public health pretty soon thereafter. And then was a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And they have a water institute. In the Water Institute, I worked there as a postdoctoral research associate for several years. And that also led me to conduct research in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and further research in parts of Latin America. So I think at every step of the way, I was sort of working on these aspects of water, sanitation, hygiene, access, quality, looking at disparities, health disparities that result from inequities in access to water, sanitation, hygiene. Some of those were related to gender. Some of those were related to sort of rural, urban resources. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the things that sort of led me to this sort of area of research.
What about you, Alhelí?
Yeah, well, I'm a Mexican physician, and when I was in med school, I connect with this International Federation of Medical Students Association, where I learn about social determinants of health and global health, and learn about different like structural factors that affect health, like community health. And that was one of the reasons that I decided to pursue a master in public health. I studied in the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico, near Mexico City. And there my thesis was about access to water, sanitation, and hygiene among indigenous families in central Mexico, in Xochitepec, a municipality that is like close by to the capital, Cuernavaca. And there, that was my first approach to start learning and studying access and management of water at household level. But another very important factor was in Mexico and also in the US, there is a huge problem related with not communicable diseases. And one of the factors are the soda and sweet beverages. And so it makes me like think about how in many contexts it's more easy to drink any other beverages than water, because of the quality, because of the price, because of the accessibility. So I start like putting my efforts and my attention on this to everyone everywhere, right? But of course there are communities that need more, that are experiencing more challenges in this sense. Indigenous communities are one of them. In this particular community, they also have like, well, traditions around the holy water areas where they protect like a specific sites where the water is born. And well, after my master's, I moved to Tijuana, and there I started working with the community who live inside the Tijuana River. This is a community experiencing homelessness. Thanks to this project, we open a Pandora box about all the necessities, all the needs that this community require. And one of the most important ones, a part of the housing, is the access to basic services and basic human rights. And this is how I started my PhD in UCSD and SDSU, where I met Georgia, one of my mentor during this journey. And yeah, so this is how I ended up studying access to water, sanitation, and hygiene among communities in the US-Mexico border, including Tijuana, San Diego, and homelessness communities, but also like migrants, deportee populations, and other like specific groups that also require more attention in these topics.
I have been thinking about this, and the unhoused population has many challenges. And if you can provide an overview of the challenges that this population has to us and our listeners.
I was just looking at some of the more recent statistics of people experiencing homelessness from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So many of us sort of see, or those of us who live in major urban areas like San Diego or San Francisco or Los Angeles, maybe have noticed this, but there definitely is an increase in people experiencing homelessness in the United States. And the latest sort of statistics suggests that in January 2023, it was 653,000 people experiencing homelessness in the United States. And this was the highest number reported since the national reporting started on this in 2007. And when you look at that data for just California, that's about 181,000 people experiencing homelessness in California on a single night in January 2023. So that number has increased. And even though there are sort of many more services and more shelters and more housing, more permanent housing has been expanded for people experiencing homelessness, there's still this growing number. And of people that I've worked with and people that I've mentored started to talk about this problem and challenge, and especially when it comes to access to basic services for this population. So I've spent a lot of my time thinking about is water, sanitation, and hygiene access among vulnerable populations. We started trying to figure out what kind of water, sanitation, and hygiene access these people had. And we wanted to do this. It's really, as you might imagine, difficult to find people, right, and know where they're living. But we sort of started to collaborate with different people. And so we have one study that was conducted with one of our students in Los Angeles, and that was looking at a cross-sectional study of about 263 unhoused people living on Skid Row and looking at wash services for this population. And then we collaborated with a colleague here at the University of California, San Diego, Stephanie Strathty, who already was working on a cross-sectional study of people who inject drugs living in San Diego and Tijuana, many of whom are unhoused. And so we started to sort of look at and ask these kinds of questions about what kind of access do people have as far as water, as far as sanitation, hygiene. In some cases, we were able to ask menstrual hygiene questions. We also asked about showers, access to showers, and access to an ability to sort of wash clothing. So thinking about this population, then thinking about wash access was sort of what got us to this point. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So we really are just scratching the surface and really started in two populations that are close to us. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this area. And then Alhelí can talk more about the study we did on the San Diego and Tijuana, since she was the lead author on some of those papers, and that was part of her dissertation research.
And I think this is the perfect segue. I mean, on the last, I don't know how many years, but very recently, you've been both working on a study to access to drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene of people who injected drugs and live along the U.S.-Mexico border in Tijuana and San Diego. So can you describe that project? And could you share your glasses to our listeners and tell us what that project looks like?
Well, when we talk about people who use drugs, it's very important to talk about homelessness because more than 60% of them experience homelessness, at least in the U.S.-Mexico border. This was a study among almost 600 people. Well, it's 586 people who inject drugs in Tijuana and San Diego, 66% from San Diego, 34% from Tijuana. And it's more than 60% experience homelessness in both sides of the border. So the characteristic of this population is very similar. That's why we study this population as a metropolitan area, binational metropolitan area, because even when there are like some differences, it's surprising how similar challenges they are experiencing in both sides of the border. For example, only 56% of participants reported always having sufficient access to drinking water. And connected with what I say before, half of them drink other beverages instead of water when they are thirsty. And if we think about their wellness, their health, like how much water they need to intake every day, 97% of them have a daily water intake below medical recommendations. So there is a very important lack of access, availability of drinking water. It is a little bit bigger, a little bit more insecure to access drinking water in Tijuana than in San Diego, but I mean, both communities really need to increase access. Similarly, access to hand washing was reported by only 38% of participants. I'm talking about hand washing with water and soap. But when we asked them, are you always able to access to these services. Only less than 3% of them did. And I want to highlight something that Georgia mentioned about the showers. I think showers is also one of the most important challenges for this population, because even drinking water and sanitation, there are some ways in how they can like solve these needs, like drinking something else or buying, or like using public toilet, which are also not very available. But when they want to take a shower, this is one of the most difficult like hygiene activities that they can like practice in a regular day. And this dissertation, or well, this project include 3 different approaches. One is like the comprehensive study of the access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. But another one very important is about people who menstruate. And yeah, so women and other people who menstruate, they also need water, sanitation, and hygiene services plus access to menstrual product. But there is a very important gender-based violence point here. So they also need privacy. They need a place where they can wash their clothes or wash their hands when they are managing menstruation, and also places free of violence. Is also, we found that it's very common. It's common that people experience violence, physical or like verbal violence or sexual violence using public facilities like toilet, restrooms. And finally, the last approach we had in this study is how insecurity accessing to these services is associated with incidents of abscess. The study was among people who inject drugs, and we found that independently of the country, this community increased their chances to have an abscess if they don't have access to showers, if they don't have access to safe water to prepare drugs for injection, and also if they practice open defecation. So these are like very basic services that we can like help in the we can increase the accessibility to this service and increase their health and well-being in general. And well, just to answer the question about the most important challenges, of course, is the housing, but also the violence. Not just directly violence, but structural violence and environmental injustice, because people experiencing homelessness tend to be in environments more risky than other communities.
Yeah, thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Lelia. I'm not sure if, Georgia, you want to add something to the study that was done in Tijuana, San Diego.
Alhelí really spoke about that study. I just wanted to add to it about another cross-sectional study we did that was led by a postdoc that works in the lab. Her name is Joana Avilar Portillo, and she looked at 263 unhoused people. These were not people who inject drugs. These were just unhoused people living in Skid Row in Los Angeles. And sort of to add to what Alhelí just spoke about, I just wanted to also iterate some additional challenges that we found. One big challenge was access to sanitation at night. So while there are public facilities available during the day that might be open, they were not open 24 hours a day. And so when people did not have access to sanitation at night, it forced them to openly defecate, to use buckets and tents, to sort of do anything that they could because there wasn't this open access to sanitation. So just a basic bathroom. And this was very problematic for this population that we studied. And then also people were sometimes, to access water, were forced to use fire hydrants, or a lot of people would use stores, but again, not necessarily open at night. So then you have to carry the water that you need for the evenings. And then shower and laundry access is, as we mentioned before, is extremely important because a lot of people are discriminated against when they're unclean or look unhygienic, and it makes it very difficult for them to, access employment, to even just walk into stores and not be discriminated against. So I think this just some continuous access to sort of basic services like water and sanitation could really be improved among these populations. In Los Angeles, on Skid Row, where we did this research, in San Diego, where we've done this research, and also in Tijuana, where we've done this research. So it's definitely, there's a need for more people working on this challenge, this problem. And I just wanted to add that other study to sort of, and then also comment on the lack of access in the evenings and at night.
I have a follow-up question. I guess I am wondering if this is a situation where the cities, like LA and like San Diego, don't understand the magnitude of the problem and the specific aspects of it, or is it an issue where there's awareness and there's not resources? Like, from your perspective, like, why do you think that there aren't 24-hour restrooms for these groups? Like, I was thinking about Skid Row, and that area has been, like supporting these populations for a long time, right? So like, why is some of this stuff still a challenge? Or like, why are there still challenges? Or is it something that just is still unknown?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't have the full answer. I have some of the answer, maybe. I think one big challenge is there are city ordinances in some places like Skid Row and others that call for these encampment sweeps, which really destroy some of the access that people may have to sort of basic services. So when a huge encampment sweep happens, people are forced to flee or move somewhere else. Makes it very difficult to access water, sanitation, and hygiene services. Sometimes there are public facilities. Sometimes they are available for a period of time, and then they either don't get cleaned or, and then sometimes they get moved or taken away. These are sort of more portable restroom services. There have been a few mobile wash services. Lava May is one where it's like a vehicle brings mobile services. So it's like mobile sanitation. There's often come with water. Sometimes they come with a shower, and then they can actually drive it around, right? So it's like a trailer. And that has been extremely successful in some locations because it's mobile, right? So you can move to where people are. And especially if there are these sweeps and people have to move, then that mobile facility can, move to where people are. The challenge with it is that usually these are funded by nonprofits. And so the financing and the sustainability of that financing is challenging. So sometimes there are resources and sometimes not. So we've seen some of these services sort of be available during the pandemic, for example, but then right now, they don't have enough funding. And so some of them are not operating anymore. So I think there is more that, that the city could do. There's definitely more, that as people become more aware of the need for these services, maybe also more that nonprofits could do. And then Alhelí has pointed in her work to what can be done in sort of harm reduction facilities where people are going to get treatment. And so there could be more focus on wash services in some of those harm reduction facilities. But there is a lot that needs to be done. And I think it really is going to take a multifaceted approach with many different sort of players and also, a basic, I guess, change in some of the perspective of our in-house population. So we need policymakers who want and believe that our unhoused population should have access to basic water, sanitation, and hygiene. And it is a human right in the state of California, access to these basic services. So I think there also has to be a slight cultural shift in the way that we look at some of the unhoused that are living on the streets in our communities.
So what I want to say is that San Diego has, and Los Angeles, of course, are cities with the largest communities of people experiencing homelessness. So I understand San Diego is the fourth city in the whole country. So there are a lot of initiatives in San Diego, in LA, in San Francisco, in New York, which are the big cities. But the amount of people is huge. Last estimations that I read for last year was 8,000 people in San Diego. And so even when there are sources, these sources are maybe not enough for the amount of people that need it. There are other type of barriers that also prevent people to be in shelters or to go to places where they can use this type of facilities. One of them is the drug use. Many of these shelters don't allow people who use drugs. Even in Tijuana, it's the same. Many shelters don't even let them if they use in the last couple of weeks. So it's practically impossible for many people to be allowed to be in these kind of facilities. Other is that families usually are separated and they prefer to be in the street than be separate from their families. And one more is the pets, actually, the pets. If they don't allow them to be in the shelters with their pets, they prefer to be in the streets. I learned that one of the most important shelters in San Diego just changed that, and they now keep families together, and they now let them be with their pets. So this is a very interesting action that I would like to see what's the impact of it. There is nothing like that in Tijuana yet, but also the amount of people experiencing homelessness in Tijuana is less. It's about 1,000. So the difference between San Diego and Tijuana is 1 to 8. And most of the people, about 70%, 65% of people experiencing homelessness in Tijuana are people deported from Southern California, who actually most of them have been deported because drug use. And even when the quantity, the amount of people is smaller in Tijuana, the resources are more limited there. So they are a little bit different approaches that these two cities needed. And even though WASH access, I didn't mention that WASH access was lower than international recommendation standards and national averages in both countries.
A big part of what the two of you have spoken about indirectly kind of until this point is just changing our perception of people who are experiencing housing insecurity. And a concept that you've mentioned in your work related to this is called radical hospitality. Can you tell us a little bit more about what radical hospitality is?
Yeah, I would just add that there's some of these mobile hygiene, water, sanitation, hygiene services have been provided by nonprofits that have this radical hospitality approach. And I'm actually reading from Lava Mae's website, and sadly, they've closed a lot of their mobile wash services because of, I think, funding. But they sort of have this approach that, and they have it sort of written on their trucks, I think, even. But they say, people who have, or they worry that if you're too comfortable, you'll never want to leave. But they've never been in your shoes. Many of us have. So when we say your name, look in your eye, offer you a hot shower and a warm towel, it's because we consider you to be our guest. And then they say, it's our honor to serve you. It makes us proud. Thank you for that. Yeah. And then it says at the end, because we love our city and you're a big part of it, together we'll make it better. And so this is this idea of radical hospitality that I think a lot of people don't think of when they're thinking of our unhoused populations, but some of these nonprofits do approach WASH services with that perspective. And I think that it has been one of the ways in which they've actually been able to serve so many people is because of that approach. So I would just say that's also a big component of it, is having that approach. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add something that I just have in mind when I think about radical hospitality. They say it's to treat those who often feel invisible with an extraordinary level of respect, to open the opportunity to feel clean again. Yeah, and it's very interesting that hygiene is that powerful, even when we want that anyone can be treated equally with respect and as a human being in any condition. Lack of hygiene increase violence, increase discrimination, decrease self-esteem, and prevent a lot of people to do a lot of things in a daily life.
Yeah, that makes sense. It goes back to what you were saying about just trying to bring back humanity, right? So like without hygiene, you don't feel human. That's why I like the hospitality aspects. It's like, well, everybody deserves hospitality, and that's also a part of being human and trying to change. How do you change minds? And I like that framework for trying to change minds.
We always like to end our podcast with asking you, how can we support, how can our listeners and us can support your work, and if there is anything else that you want us to know about your work.
Well, from my more like activist part, I could invite you to join to follow the Tijuana River Project in social media. You can find us as Proyecto Socioambiental Río Tijuana, and you can join us in in debate, so you can learn what these NGOs. There are two NGOs, Provencas and Proyecto Fronterizo de Educación Ambiental. These two NGOs are the ones who are like actually working with the community and with their daily problems in this environment and with this population from the Tijuana side. So you can learn what they're doing.
Yeah, gracias, Alhelí. Georgia?
Well, let's see. I think we talked about some of the sort of suggestions that we had or ideas that we had, but I would say sort of having a little bit of a cultural shift in people's minds about our unhoused populations. And as Alhelí said, they are people, and we do have a human right to water, sanitation, and hygiene in California, and these people also deserve continuous access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. And then, so I think that's one thing that people can do. They can look to different nonprofits that might be providing some of these services. And I agree with Alhelí, they're sort of a Band-Aid, these sort of temporary services or mobile services, because really WASH services are tied to housing. And so if people don't have housing, then they won't have WASH services. But some of these temporary, like I just looked on the Lava May website, and it looks like they've sort of closing a lot of their programs and operations. And they had a very sort of wonderful approach to providing showers and water and sanitation. And when these sort of nonprofits exist, I think they need sort of continuous support, and that can be a challenge for some of them. And this one, it looks like too. So that sustainability is challenging, and the funding that's over the longer term can be challenging for some of these nonprofits. But I would say those are some of the ways that people can, and even just thinking about the unhoused as people, as we said before, so that when you're voting on issues related to this, or when you're talking to your neighbors or friends, I think that can be helpful in just spreading a little bit more of a positive image of people, and really that these are basic services that people need.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Lily. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for listening to the Water Talk podcast. I'm Faith Carnes, and I'm the Director of Research Communications with the Arizona Water Innovation Initiative at Arizona State University.
My name is Samuel Sandoval. I'm a professor at UC Davis and a cooperative extension specialist in water resources management at the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
I'm Molly Kanoko, Assistant Professor and State Extension Specialist in Agricultural Water Management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you enjoy our show, please review, listen, like, and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. Please find transcripts and additional content at watertalkpodcast.com. Original music by Paloma Herrera Thomas.